Welcome back, everyone. In this lecture, it's time to test your skills with k-means clustering. We're going to have an overview of the exercise notebook and questions, and in the next lecture, we'll go over the solutions. Let's get started. Okay, here we are at the notebook for a CIA country analysis and clustering project. Keep in mind, this is unsupervised learning, so the goal is really just to gain insights into similarity between countries and regions of the world by experimenting with different cluster amounts, and then using just your general knowledge of what countries are similar to other countries, see if you can figure out what these clusters represent. The biggest thing I want to point out here is, unlike supervised learning project exercises, there's really no 100% right answer as far as how many clusters you should have chosen. Really, this is about insight and data exploration. So let's see what this actually looks like. So all the data comes from the CIA World Factbook, which just contains a bunch of data points surrounding just a bunch of countries. So the first cell is to just run the imports and data. We've already filled those out for you. There's a CIA country facts.csv file available for you, and then it's for exploratory data analysis. So what I want you to do is just start exploring the data frame itself. You'll notice there's countries, regions, populations, areas and square miles, densities, etc. You can check out what's going on here with the different features on arable percentage of land, climate, birth rate, etc. You can also do this with .info. And as you continue, we're going to start off with exploratory data analysis. So we'll guide you through some visualizations we want you to create, such as histograms of the population. Obviously, it's very skewed for certain countries like China and India, so we'll have you kind of rescale that x-axis. We'll also have you explore GDP and regions. So you'll notice here some analysis of GDP versus regions. Then we'll want you to create a scatter plot showing the relationship between phones per 1,000 people and GDP per capita. We also want you to color these points by region. Note here how that legend is outside of this plot. And then we're going to have you create a scatter plot showing the relationship between GDP per capita and literacy. Again, coloring the points by region. And there's some interesting insights to have here. Then finally, we'll create a heat map of the correlation between columns in the data frame. So what columns are heavily correlated with others? Some, it makes a lot of sense because they're kind of showing the same information. So keep that in mind. Things like birth rate and infant mortality are almost showing the same thing, so they'll be highly correlated to each other. Then we'll go ahead and continue. We also talk about Seaborn that can perform hierarchical clustering. That's not the same thing as k-means clustering. We'll actually talk about hierarchical clustering in the next section, but keep in mind this could actually be done automatically through Seaborn, so we can see this happening here. Want you to do that with the features. And then it becomes time for data prep and model discovery. So what are we actually going to do here? We're going to have to deal with the data. There's some missing data points, so we want you to report how many data points are missing per column. And then we guide you as far as just general approaches on how you could fill in this missing data. So for example, what countries have no data for agriculture? You should notice that the main aspects of these countries is they're mostly tiny islands. So we'll guide you on what you think or what we think you should do as far as filling in or dropping rows or just filling in values of 0 where it makes sense, because for instance, in some of these islands, it really doesn't make sense that there's any agriculture there, so you can go ahead and just say 0 for an agricultural value. And what you're going to do is follow along with the tasks, and tasks basically explain what you should start doing, and we have some hints on how to do certain more advanced operations. And eventually, as you go through these tasks, you should find yourself getting rid of almost all the missing values. And there's only a few countries that you'll have missing at the end, but there's these little tiny countries that you can go ahead and just drop from the data set, since you're not going to really be able to plot those out anyways. They're just kind of tiny islands out there. Okay. So once you have that, you need to prepare your features and your remaining data once you've taken care of any missing data points. And as we know, we want to create an X-array of features, drop certain columns that are kind of unique identifiers. It doesn't make sense to have, for instance, the country column, since it's essentially a unique identifier for every single row, and we're trying to just cluster things in general. We also want to deal with categorical strings and variables, so we'll guide you through that as well as scaling. Once you've done that, you should be ready to create and fit your k-means model. And what we'll have you do is essentially create a loop from K2 to all the way to K30 clusters, and then keep track of the sum of the squared distances for each K value, and then you're going to create your elbow plot. And again, there's kind of no right answer here on where you should maybe have a reasonable cutoff for the K value. You could also do a bar plot here, and you can see that maybe even after just 3 regions, you're not dropping that much in SSD, Or maybe after around 15, you see the major drops. So there's kind of multiple correct answers here. Go ahead and continue. And this is where we get into model interpretation as far as what k-value do you think is a good choice, and are there multiple reasonable choices. This is something we're going to discuss a lot more in the solutions lecture, but we're going to say, for example, an interpretation of k is equal to 3 as reasonable. What are the similar countries after we actually do the cluster assignments, and what features are kind of highly important for that particular clustering. So you can see here ends up being things like literacy and regions, as far as death rates and infant mortality rates for k is equal to 3. So that's kind of a measurement of how developed the country is. Then finally, after all this, we have the bonus challenge. And this is where I want to pause and really stress that this is a completely optional bonus section, because here we're really trying to have you stretch into different skills that we really haven't touched upon throughout any of the course lectures, but instead you have the ability to be able to Google search and look up useful information as far as what libraries you should be using in order to do a geographical model interpretation. And we're going to do our best to kind of guide you and give you heavy-handed hints, but really this is kind of a bonus optional. If you get stuck anywhere here, don't worry about it. Go ahead and jump to the solutions and we'll guide you through this, because we haven't taught a lot of this kind of on purpose to see how far can you stretch your own skills. Kind of when we drop you into an area we haven't really held your hand in before. So what we're going to do here is, again, you're going to choose or create cluster labels for some chosen k-value. And after the analysis, you can choose k is equal to 3 or k is equal to 15. Those are probably both reasonable choices. And then we're going to put you in the real world, and we have 5 or really 4 steps for you to follow. I want you to figure out how to install the Plotly library. There's a link that gives you a hint there. Number 2, figure out how to create a geographical choropleth map using Plotly, and then using the ISO codes we provide for you with the CSV file, figure out how you can combine that CSV file with step number 2 and the cluster labels in order to create a map plot that's going to show you the coloring of the actual countries per cluster. Again, really trying to stress this is kind of a more realistic project. Your boss may say, hey, go ahead and cluster these countries together, and then reasonably your boss is going to ask you to plot out those countries on a map that are colored based off their cluster. So see if you can use a lot of the hints we give you here to actually create that mapping yourself, and eventually you'll get a world map with colors. If you get stuck on any of this as part of the bonus part, skip straight to the solutions and we'll show you how to do it all there, no problem. All right, best of luck, and I'll see you at the next lecture.